Thank you so much, excuse me, for the invitation to speak to you today, and I apologize in advance. I seem to have come down with a cold somewhere between Saturday night and Sunday morning, so I appreciate your patience. I'll try not to cough or sneeze too much during my talk. This is a very exciting opportunity for me to show you this decision-making tool that we have created. I am going to spend a little bit of time talking about how we developed this tool and the small amount of data that we currently have in terms of acceptability and usability of the tool. But what I really want to spend most of this time on is showing you what the tool looks like, how it works, and talk about how patients can use it. I do want to make sure to give credit to the Birch. It's a career development award that funded this project. And I had a very large team of mentors, consultants. Dr. Woodruff was one of my consultants on this project. And Dr. Mary Zielinski, who I think is somewhere in the room, I see her right there, was one of my mentors as well, as in addition to several others. I had never worked with such a large team before, and while it had its challenges, it was a great opportunity for me to truly work on an interdisciplinary team, from bench basic scientists and all the way to oncologists and myself as a mental health professional. So let me just start by telling you a little bit about the process we use to develop this tool. So the Ottawa decision framework is a well-used development process for creating patient decision aids. And many of us have a very clear sense in our head of what a patient decision aid is. And while this one will probably go against all of your ideas of what a decision aid is, it does actually meet all of the qualifications. So it is officially a decision aid. I generally use the term decision support tool because it is a bit more interactive and really focused on adolescent and young adult development, using some different approaches to the decision-making process. But we did follow a similar process to most decision aids, which is starting with a literature review. Now, usually in step one, the only thing you do in this step is a comprehensive literature review, but because there is such a limited amount of literature, and I have to give credit where credit is due, because the literature that does exist, much of it came out of the Oncofertility Consortium, or because of the Oncofertility Consortium doing this work. But there wasn't enough literature to say, okay, we know exactly what a decision aid needs to look like. So we actually collected some qualitative data of our own. We did a grounded theory-based qualitative research study, which I'll talk briefly about. The next step was to actually develop a draft or a prototype of the decision aid. We then tested it with survivors and healthcare professionals. It was important for us, obviously, to have survivors use the tool, and I'll talk about what that process looked like, but it was also important for us to have providers, healthcare professionals, use the tool, because we needed to make sure that it was something that A, made sense to them, but B, really filled a niche for them. It really was a tool that was going to complement what they were doing, the conversations that they were having, and the way they were working with patients in terms of shared decision making. This tool was never meant to replace a conversation with a healthcare professional. We used to sort of joke initially that we were trying to create an educated electronic best friend, because many of the young women would say to us, I just wish that I had a friend who I could talk to, but who actually knew everything. And so this was our electronic educated best friend, if you will. The last step, step 5, is where we are headed right now, which is to test the effectiveness of the tool in a population actively making a decision. And I'll talk about each of these steps today. We won't talk about step 5 because it's in the works. So for starters, we did do our comprehensive literature review. This brought us to several areas. One was obviously looking at oncofertility issues in the literature that did exist. We also needed to look at decision-making with this age group in other areas because there was not as much literature specifically in this area. We needed to look more broadly at decision-making among adolescents and young adults, and also looking very closely at the developmental literature of what did we know about cognitive development and processing, what do we know about impulsiveness and the role of emotions in decision-making. So development and developmental stage was extremely important in preparing this tool. As I mentioned, we also did our own grounded theory-based study to inform the decision tool. And what we came up with was something of a framework, if you will, a means of organizing the data to show the process through which young women were moving in order to make a decision. And I'm going to show you that framework in just a moment. There were a couple other sort of pieces that really informed our tool that we got from this qualitative study, and one of those was just the primary role of professional and personal supports and the different roles that they played in the decision-making process. I know that I work in an adult oncology setting, although I work across settings frequently because of my role in adolescent and young adult oncology, but my home is on the adult side. And oftentimes on the adult side, we look to the patient as a singular person, as though it is one, we are treating the patient. And obviously, with most people, there are other people connected to that patient. But with adolescents and young adults, this looks rather unique because we don't necessarily know who those people are going to be. On the pediatric side, we look to the parents or guardians, but with an adolescent or young adult, we might be talking about a best friend, we might be talking about a mentor or an aunt. There might be other people in the family that have taken a primary role, which is more common in this younger age group. And oftentimes those people took a very large role in the decision-making with the young women who we spoke to. And we see in the literature the strong role of social support for young people. So our research certainly supported those concepts. The other thing that we noticed was that there, and again, this is well, obviously, but no one had documented exactly all the factors that go into the decision making. I know that we often talk a lot about the finances, and not to say that finances didn't come up in our study, they certainly did, but finances also never came up as a deciding factor. They weren't the deal breaker. So of all the young women who we spoke to, the majority of them did bring up the issue of finance, but no one said, I did not do it because of the money. They said, you wouldn't believe the crazy things we were talking about doing to get the money. And so that was interesting for us because, again, I think we all had some preconceived notions about the role of some of these factors. What I think might be the most interesting piece that we learned from this piece of the project, and one that I had honestly never given much thought to, is what young women think the question is when their oncologist says, your fertility might be compromised by your treatment, what do you want to do? And what we learned is, the oncologist believes that they are asking a young woman, do you want to see the fertility specialist? Do you want to consider preserving some genetic materials? But what is running through the patient's heads based on our interviews was, are you married? Are you going to get married? Are you ever going to have children? Do you want children? Do you actually like that guy that you're dating? Are you sure that you want to stay in the current relationship that you're in? If you have kids, are you going to become your mother? Those are all of the things that we heard from these young women. And the oncologist is standing there thinking, I just asked you if you wanted to go see the fertility specialist. I don't understand why this is so difficult. But what we're asking is for young women who've just been diagnosed with cancer, who've just been told that their fertility might be compromised, is so much bigger than, did you want to go see the fertility specialist? And that's really the place that our tool hopefully will come in. So just so you get an idea of this, this is kind of how we've mapped out the decision-making process that we saw in the women who we interviewed. And again, sometimes when I look at this, I think, well, couldn't we have drawn this without all that research? And maybe we could have, but we wouldn't have had the documentation that this is the common process that young women are moving through. And you'll see the process starts with identity. And this was really, there was so much about who the young women were as they came into this decision, which makes the way they formulate or understand the question at hand, it really makes that make sense. And when you think of this in a developmental context, you can certainly appreciate why a decision framework has to start with identity. So who were you when you walked in the door today before someone told you that you had cancer and that your treatment might compromise your fertility? Obvious next in this process has to be awareness of risk, and this is highly dependent on the kind of information and the amount of information that young women were receiving. We had several young women who had just received information that was just inaccurate, just flat out incorrect. We had one young woman who had not been made aware of her risk at all until she was about halfway through her treatment. Someone said it in passing, sort of a too bad statement, which was really upsetting, and several young women who felt like it was sort of caught accidentally. They were inpatient for something that was, they were inpatient for something other than their treatment because their treatment hadn't started yet. And there happened to be a new trainee on the floor who saw that there was a young woman with a cancer diagnosis who had not started treatment and took it upon themselves to go visit this young woman and say, I saw your diagnosis and I don't know if anyone's talked to you about this, and no one had. So there was some, I guess in her case, some very fortunate serendipity. But the awareness of risk varies greatly. Again, framing the decision, this is the idea of how are young women understanding the concept or the question? What do they think they're even making a decision about? And again, the most common decision that young women thought they were making is, do you want to have children? As opposed to, do you want to preserve the opportunity, or do you want to increase the chances later? But this was really about, do you want to have kids? And oftentimes they would get nervous and say, well, I'm not ready to have kids. And that's a difficult place to start a conversation, because we're not talking about right now, we're talking about later. But it's awfully hard to talk about later when you just got diagnosed with cancer. And then you've just been told you're getting this treatment that not only will affect your fertility, but all of these other things about your lives. And then you put it into a developmental context and say, you're 16, you're 22, you're 34, and you've just found out all of these things. And it's really hard to talk about later at that point. Which is where we talk about considering current state. So many of the young women talked about the state of their current relationship or lack thereof, their plans for their future, what their perception of what their future could look like based on their diagnosis, which we actually looked back at prognosis and to see if those actually aligned, and they didn't. So it didn't matter. I think another misconception that I know many of us on my team had was that, well, young women who thought that they were going to do better might have a better chance or be better prepared to make a decision like this. And the truth was, it mattered less about what the actual prognosis they received from their doctor, but just about what their concept in their head was about what it meant to have cancer and what it meant to have some risk of your fertility being compromised. One young woman, I think she had just turned 18. She was diagnosed initially at 16, and she said that she wasn't worried at all because she felt like she was meant to have children and that everything was going to be okay. And to this day, I hope that she is right, but based on the treatment that she was receiving, she was considered at very high risk for having compromised fertility post-treatment. In any case, moving on, you can see that sort of mix, the blender symbol there in the middle showing support. Now, these were both professional and what we would call natural supports or personal supports. So friends, family, not professionally trained supports, as well as professional supports, all the different factors that were considered, a variety of decision tools that young women had. You know, had they made difficult decisions before? How did they make decisions? Were they list makers? Were they impulsive decision makers? Just different kinds of tools that they had themselves for making decisions. And then what we sort of looked at as external forces, these were things that the young women saw as being out of their control. For example, one young woman said, well, as soon as the oncologist brought it up to us, my father said no, and that was the end of the conversation. And she said, maybe if I wasn't 16 at the time, I would have been able to choose to continue having that conversation. So she saw her age and her father as an external force, something that she was unable to control. Then, of course, there's the decision whether to preserve or not, is how we sort of simplified whether they took some action or not, and then a reflection on those consequences. An interesting point about the actual decision is the majority of young women that we interviewed, I actually had to ask them what they ended up deciding, because it wasn't the focus of the conversation. Our conversation was really about the how and not the what did you decide. But it was interesting to me that upon reflection, the actual decision that they made was less in the forefront of their minds than was the actual experience of making the decision. And of course, the reflection. So the young women we interviewed were young women who had made decisions within the past 2 years. So they had previously decided and were looking back on their decision-making process. And one of the interesting things that we learned about this reflection is really how much it changed who they were going into the next decision, which is why you see the arrow on the top there going back into identity. Because, and this is something we do know in the literature, that each decision-making experience leads you into the next and affects how you make the next decision. We see similar process in disclosure. If anyone's read any of that literature, done any work in that area, the experience of deciding to make a disclosure about a diagnosis and the experience of making that disclosure actually changes and shapes the way you will enter into the next decision and the next disclosure experience. So that iterative process wasn't shocking, but it was nice to see that this decision-making process sort of follows something of an expected decision-making process, if you will. I'm so sorry about that heading. That has nothing to do with what is on this slide. That is not the current state of the movement. But fortunately, the content of the slide is accurate. The theoretical framework that I just showed you informed the content and the language of the tool. The literature obviously also informed the content of the tool, but very much the structure and the developmental relevance, as I was talking about before. We can't forget the power of the role of development with this population related to decision making. Specific attention was given obviously to the content, but also using accessible and relevant language. So one of the things that we did was we actually used a lot of the language right out of our interviews with patients, so that the words that we were using in the tool were actually the words that were meaningful to young women and were the kinds of words that they were using. And as I previously mentioned, we did follow the criteria set out by the International Patient Decision Aids Standards Collaboration. So the fortunate piece of having such standards is that we know that our tool aligns with the international standards for decision aid. Oh, good. Our headings are back on track now. In steps 3 and 4, we evaluated the Fertility Preservation Explorer. As I mentioned, we actually did 3 separate rounds of evaluation with survivors and healthcare professionals. And we did it this way so that we could edit and revise as we went. So we used our own iterative process. So we did one round of interviewing and user testing with survivors and one with healthcare professionals, and then we revised the prototype. And then we did that again 2 more times to make sure that what we were putting out was something that made sense, that was relevant, that was accurate, that was enough information and not too much information. It was flexible enough not to be confusing. In the very first version that we put out, the tool let you start anywhere. There was no sort of linear path to it whatsoever, because we thought, well, young people don't want a linear path. They just want to go wherever they want to go and find out whatever they want to find out. And that was wrong. Every person who we showed it to said, I don't know where to start. Can you tell me where to start? We thought, okay, well, we need to have a start. There needs to be a beginning. So that was an example of one of the things that really early on we saw that, again, we had some misconceptions or some preconceived notions about what a tool for young people should look like. The young women who we did the user testing with, so we did a combination. It was user testing with cognitive interviewing. So basically, we had young women sit down with the tool and talk through everything that they were doing when they were using the tool. So I would just say, tell me what's running through your head, and they would just sort of talk out loud through the process, reading out loud what was on the screen, telling me what they were reading, what they were not reading. We also we also measured acceptability after they used the tool, and we did give them a knowledge quiz before and after. And the knowledge quiz and the acceptability measure we gave to both the healthcare professionals and to the survivors. We obviously collected demographic information on everyone. For the healthcare professionals, we collected a little bit of information about their specialty, how many young cancer patients they see annually on average. And then for survivors, we collected some information about when was your consult, when was your diagnosis, did you get a consult from Fertility, and did you end up taking any action? And as you can see, the young women who we interviewed had to be between the ages of 15 and 39, which is the National Cancer Institute definition of adolescent and young adult. And they needed to be that age at the time of the interview and at the time of diagnosis, because we wanted to make sure that we were having users the age that the actual patients would be, and that they had made a decision within the past 3 years, although all of them had made a decision, I think, in the past 2 years. The healthcare professionals were across a variety of disciplines. Again, we wanted to make sure that we had buy-in and mostly just that this was something that they would say, oh, this would actually be helpful, and this is how we would use it, which was one of the questions we asked the providers. So I'm just going to show you a few of a couple bits of the data that we collected in terms of acceptability from survivors. You can see the length of the decision aid. Most of them said it was just right. There, 24%, almost a quarter, said it was too long, which is something that we're kicking around because it is long. We also subsequently developed a log-on capability so that you can leave and come back, but I'm not completely sold yet, but we're getting close. And then the amount of information, again, about that same 75-25 split you can see. I'm not sure what the one person who said there was too little information, she must have been very hungry for information, because once you'll see it, you'll see that there is quite a bit of information there. You can see all of the young women said that this tool would have been helpful, and believe that there's enough information there that would help them have a conversation, have a meaningful conversation with a healthcare professional, which is the goal. Again, the tool is not meant to serve as a substitute for a conversation with a healthcare professional, but to prepare young women and to be able to process all the information provided and make an educated decision. You can see here what our healthcare professionals thought, and you can see by the absolute numbers, this was a small, and this was user testing, cognitive interviewing, so this was a rather small sample. But you can see that the majority of providers said that this seemed like a better strategy to what they were currently doing, that patients would end up being more informed, and that they thought it would be helpful for their patients. A little figure to show the changes in knowledge. You'll see the change for healthcare professionals is small, which is good, because that means that most of them actually knew this stuff before they used the tool. I will tell you that we did have a few professionals who used the tool and got many of the questions wrong on the knowledge quiz. Some of the ones that I thought were really, really important. And it actually surprised me that there are still some healthcare professionals who just didn't have basic knowledge. And the questions were things, they were all true-false questions, and they were things about, you know, that preserving eggs is a fertility preservation option. I mean, they were very simplistic questions, things that anyone interacting with cancer survivors should be able to answer. So that change was actually a little disturbing to me. I expected everyone to score 100. And as you can see, there was a reasonable increase for patient knowledge. Okay, this is the moment of truth with our technology. I have my fingers crossed. Okay, so this is what the tool looks like when you first open it. Don't uncross your fingers yet, because you haven't seen it all yet. Once it starts working, I'll tell you when you can uncross your fingers that it'll keep working. This is the welcome page, though. As you can see, it explains what the tool is, and most importantly, it explains what the tool is not. That this is not a tool that you're going to enter a bunch of information and it is going to tell you what to do, because it won't. And I think that that's challenging, and well, in our early prototype, we actually did not have that statement, and everyone looked at me and said, well, it didn't tell me what to do. And I said, if I could make a tool that would tell you what to do, we could end this whole thing now, because everyone would just enter their information and everyone would know exactly what to do. So we felt like it was important to kind of make that disclaimer up front. This tool is not going to tell you what to do. It's going to help you figure out the best thing for you to decide to do. You'll see this little note. Again, this came out of our user testing. I don't know if you can actually read it. It says, at the end of the program, you'll see personalized information about this decision-making process. The more selections you make, the more information you'll get back. Because you can walk through the tool and click very little, and you'll get very little back out. But if you click a lot inside the tool and interact a lot with the tool, you'll get a lot more information back out. So here you can see we're saying what the decision is really about. We're framing the decision because we want to make sure that we know that young women are coming in with lots of different ideas about the decision that they're going to make, and we want to make sure we get them focused in the direction of making a decision about fertility preservation, not about the state of their current relationship and if they want to grow up to be their mother and if they actually like the guy that they're dating, but if they actually want to preserve fertility. You'll also see here there's a notes, my notes. You can click, let's see if it works. Look at that. So this is available on every screen, so patients can write anything at any time and it'll show up at the end so they can take notes. So say you're on a screen and you're like, oh, you know, I want to ask my doctor about that. I can type a couple notes in and I'll have those at the end. When you start no matter where you start on the tool, this question will pop up. And this is more from a research perspective than anything else. This is a very common kind of in decision aids. This is sort of the question that's always asked. So asking, where are you right now with this decision, and how confident are you in that decision? So users can select, for example, I'm interested in fertility preservation. I want to compare my options. I want this. I'm ready. I'm on board. All the way to fertility preservation is not for me. I'm just here to learn just in case. Because we often had patients coming in who would say, I really didn't want to do it because I just wanted to start my treatment. And then I heard A, B, and C and realized that maybe this is something I should think about. So even for a patient who's saying, I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to be able to say, you know what, here's some information just in case you want to have a look. So we're going to say, I don't think that there's one that's right for me, and I might change my mind. So nothing happens after that now. And what happens on the back end is that information is stored so that we can actually learn a little bit about users and how they're using the tool and how frequently, we didn't move fast enough, and how frequently users are actually changing their minds. So then we move, hopefully, on. There we go. And there, you can see there are a variety of different areas of information available. Each of these, we call them cards because they were meant to sort of look like laying out cards with different options. This page is all about your fertility, making sure that young women understood that this wasn't just about what was happening during cancer treatment. Sort of the state of your fertility before you got here is also really relevant. And any effect that disease had already had on your fertility was also important. It wasn't just about the treatment. So you can see they can read through the different areas. Then we also have each kind of treatment has its own page. So this is radiation. So if I know that I'm supposed to be getting ovarian radiation, I can learn more about just this one area. All of the blue words have a glossary definition in case it's a term that someone might not understand. And this way, if I'm not getting radiation to my brain, I don't even have to look at that one. So we're trying to avoid the information overload as much as possible. Chemotherapy, you can see here, again, each one, you can click as much or as many or as few as you wish. And some of the pages, let's see, it might not be showing up. Some of the pages actually have additional information here in the right-hand column, and several of those are videos, thanks to the Oncofertility Consortium, on the animations of how the treatment actually affects your ovaries, for example, demonstrating. And then also with some of the options, we have some of those animations as well, which are really fantastic and just very easy to look at so that patients can understand, especially with the ovarian tissue preservation one. So this is the options section. So here, young women can look at all of the different options. You can click on, these are sort of each of the different realms. We call this the timing because it's about whether you're doing preservation before, during, after, or additional parenting options. You can click from here and learn a little bit more about each of these times. You can also look at different ways when we use the term fertility preservation. I think we most often we're talking about preserving genetic material, but things like minimizing damage, like ovarian shielding, does fall under the term of fertility preservation. So we wanted to make sure that that was clear here, that these are all the different ways. And from here, I can click to learn a little bit more about each of the options within that category. I can also get there from this sidebar. These are the same three categories as underneath the path. Excuse me. Here I can select one of these to learn more about it. And then I am asked the question, is this something that I might be interested in? I'm going to say no. And then I can go here and take a look at these, and I can say, oh, embryo freezing, that's interesting. Yes, I might be interested in this. And I think I might be interested in this too. So I'm going to say yes. Then I move on to, oops, and it's asking me again how I'm feeling. Well, I'm not sure what to do, and now I'm probably going to change my mind. I'm going to move into thinking about who I am and who can help me make this decision. And this is the piece that, if it loads, this is the piece that I was talking about before, about identity being so important, and professional and natural supports being so important. So here's an opportunity. Pick the top 3 words or phrases that you think best describe you in general. Well, I am independent, I am goal-oriented, and I plan ahead. I can also use these next arrows down at the bottom. This again came out of the I don't know where to start and I don't know where to go next. So you can either jump through the menu or you can very clearly click linear through the process. And I think that my dad's going to help me, and my sister's going to help me, and my nurse practitioner, and my social worker. So I'm selecting all of these people. There's also always an other box. I can double click on the other box and I can type in a name of a person or a role if there was someone who we missed. So this all really came out of the interviews that we did. So you can see these are different ways that people can be helpful in a decision-making process so that young women can actually identify, what is it that I need from people? Well, I just need someone to talk this out. And who's going to do that for me? Well, my sister's really good at that. So I'm going to say my sister can help me with that. Someone to pay, my dad. See if my dad will help me pay for this. And then I would really like someone to advocate for me when I'm feeling like I can't really do this on my own. I'm going to look to my social worker and my nurse practitioner for some help in advocating. And I'm also going to see about someone to follow up with me, but I don't think it's any of those people. I'm clicking many things so that you can see the magic that happens at the end. So your decision-making style, again, going back to that, the developmental relevance, that these are young women who don't necessarily know where they stand or haven't really thought about it. So I'm going to say I'm an impulsive decision maker. And I have some skills. I can ask questions and I can learn more about what that means. And I sort these into these buckets. And I can sort as many as I choose to. I'm going to click through the next couple quickly so that you can see what happens at the end. Decision-making experience. Let's see. I've made this decision, made these decisions. I've watched someone else make decisions about life. And then what to think about. And these are the factors. And again, I can sort these and I can learn more about them. And these on the back are actual quotes directly from our interviews from our survivor participants. So this is the fun part. So now I get to see everything that I answered. So your selections is simply regurgitating everything that I said. Then I can look at each of my options, so embryo freezing, for example, and one of the things that I said I was concerned about was where I am in my relationship. And so when I click on this card, I get a little more information about what I should actually be thinking about or the questions I should be asking if I'm concerned about the state of my relationship and I'm considering embryo freezing. So we're actually cross-referencing some of those responses to provide a little bit of additional information information. And the same goes thinking about your network. I didn't have anyone who could follow up with me, and so here are some suggestions of people who might be able to do that for me. As you can see, the more you put into it, the more you get out. And our goal is now to start looking at dissemination and looking at some longer term outcomes in hopes to affect decision satisfaction and decrease decision regret. Again, the end goal is really making sure that young women are making the decision that is right for them. Thank you.
And I want to inform the audience we have 2 microphones. We are a little bit behind because of me, and so let me invite one quick question if there are any burning questions from the group. And if not, what I'd like to do, Rebecca, is to invite you and the other social science team members, the Oncofertility group, to look at your decision tool that you've developed together with those that Gwen Quinn and Marla Clayman. And let's begin to pull together a suite of decision tools that can be used here and perhaps could be translated into other languages if those become available, and if some of the other societies have decision tools that we could also use. So I'll give that as a charge to the team to actually begin to pull that together. Congratulations, a very nice presentation.
Thank you.